Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. With over 10 million books sold in 22 countries around the world, if you're a fan of legendary characters like Dismas Hardy, Abe Glitsky, and Wyatt Hunt, you'll want to be here tonight because we're joined by the one and only John Lescroart. Thank you so much for being on the show. So many of us grew up discovering reading through classic series like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn or the Hardy Boys. Who were a few of the characters that first really grabbed your imagination?
Well, I was a reader from early on. Like I distinctly remember when we moved from New York to Texas. I was in third grade, and I read Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. And reading Mark Twain for a third grader was, I don't think pretty much the norm, but I loved it, and so I got into that. And then because I was in a good Catholic school that believed that if you were doing well in school, um, you didn't need to do the curriculum that everybody else was doing. So they just turned me loose actually in my school on the landmark books, those yellow covered books. And there must have been, I don't know, 80 of them. And I read them all in third and fourth grade. It was just basically my own curriculum. So yes, I was a total nerd, and then I got into the Hardy Boys when I got a little older. I got, sixth grade again about. And again, I had another 56 book series to get through. So that was my life when I was, in school in Texas.
Before you found your voice as an author, you were actually a singer in a folk band first, correct?
I wasn't really a musician as a child. That's a little bit of a mistake. I was, in fact, not, I was such a bad singer. My father, again, there's a little Catholic story, but we had a church affiliated with our school, St. Mary's, and we went in there for I think it was an Easter service, and we were singing, a lot of songs. My dad leans over to me and he goes, "Listen, John, just stop singing." And I remember going to the back of the church, not feeling hurt or anything, but I prayed to God that he would let me have a voice so that I could sing. And I can't say I really became a singer right away. It took me a long, long time after that.
You did get good enough to play in two bands in college, though. One of them had a wild name. It was Johnny Capo and his Real Good Band, correct?
Johnny Capo and his Real Good Band. Yeah, that was not college. That in college, I was playing with a guy named Frank Seidel, who's still a great friend of mine, and we were a duo like Simon and Garfunkel. Not as good as Simon and Garfunkel, but we played the Purple Onion in San Francisco and a couple of real places. We had a gig and it started to pay for our rent. So I did that for my junior and senior year in college when I was at Berkeley. And then the other thing I did is I wound up becoming a guitar instructor. Not that I played guitar very well, but I was a few chords ahead of the other people who were in the class with me. So I did a thing called the Liturgical Guitar Institute. And I had I was about 2 weeks ahead of my students, honestly. But I had a lot of students, and I guess I was fun to be around. And it paid my rent all through college.
That's so cool that you were already using your artistry to pay your bills. You actually wrote your first novel while you were still in college, right?
Sure, I wrote my first novel in college, but it wasn't Son of Holmes. It was a book that I presciently called America No Promise. And so I wrote it. It's funny because at the time, the shortest novel that I'd ever read that called itself a novel was Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. And I was tremendously motivated by him and enthralled by Hemingway. So what I did is, went through a bunch of stuff. And then I realized, the shortest novel I've ever read that calls itself a novel is 104 pages. So what I did is I decided, okay, I'm going to sit down and write 104 pages and call it a novel. So I did. I literally sat down and wrote a page a day for 3 months, roughly. And I then had a whole novel. It was 104 pages long. It contained a character named Dismas Hardy, who I killed almost immediately upon putting him on the page. But I loved his name, and we'll get back to that, I'm sure. But anyway, then I did, I said, okay, I've written a novel. What do I do with it? And of course, the answer to that is try to get it published. But, fast forward 20 years, it took a little bit of time.
Wow, that's a stretch. Then again, they say that writers really need to live a lot of life before they start putting it down on the page. You actually led a pretty wild one in between college and when that first book was finally published.
Well, the first thing I did after school was I went to work for the Pacific Telephone Company, where I was a maintenance programmer, which is really funny because I was an English major in school and I was not a math major at all, but I was doing a lot of computer work, and I did that 2 years on the graveyard shift. And meanwhile, I had another band called Ball that we worked in San Francisco at the Holy City Zoo. And, we had a 3-man group and had a lot of fun together. But when you're working graveyard shift, it takes away from your gig time, as you know. So I did that for 2 years. Then I decided I wasn't a grown up yet. I had to go see the world. So I hopped on a plane with another buddy of mine, toured Europe for a while, went down to Africa to meet my friend Al Giannini, who was in the Peace Corps down in Senegal. I got pneumonia, malaria, and E. coli all at once. And I lost 45 pounds in about 6 weeks in Africa. So I then decided to come home, and on the way home happened to be Spain. So I took a job just because I had to make money. I had to make a living. I took a job at a pub in Lloret de Mar, Spain, which is, Warren Zevon was playing in the next town over, and, life was pretty cool there. So I did 2 years of the season in Spain where I was just playing for, not tips. I actually played, I was the house band in a place, but it was just me. So it's like Ed Sheeran nowadays. He just had his guitar and does the thing. I did that about 40 years ago. So there, Ed, what do you think of that? But anyway, I had a great time doing that. Then came back to the US, settled in LA for a while, had another band with another great friend of mine, Alan Haidt, who became the prototype of Abe Blitzky. And he's still my good buddy. And so we got a band together called Special Care, and we worked in LA for about another year. And then finally, I came up to the Bay Area, got a couple of gigs at steakhouses and things like that, put together Johnny Capo and his Real Good Band, and had a 2-year career in the Bay Area, having a pretty good time.
Were you writing all those years on the road?
Not really. I really kind of committed myself to being a musician because, that's what you're doing. Then it's kind of like the opposite of a graveyard shift situation. So I was going to work every day, and I didn't feel motivated to write a book during the day when I'm going out that night to work till 2 or 3. So anyway, it was an interesting time. It was very good. It was fun. But then my 30th birthday rolled around. And you know what they say, you can't trust anybody over 30. And I still think it may be mostly true. But I just figured my credibility was done as a rock and roll star. So I decided, okay, I'm done. And I quit on my 30th birthday, broke up the band. It's kind of sad, but I did it. And the very next day I sat down and started Sunburn. And again, 4 months later, there it was. So I said, okay, what am I going to do with it? Again, what am I going to do with it? I mean, the writing is one thing, and then what you do with the writing is quite the next. So what happened was I decided, all right, I'm going to send it to an old high school teacher of mine. He's a novelist himself, not published, but he wanted to be a novelist. He's a really nice guy. I got along with him. I wrote to my high school and asked them where he lived, and I sent him my manuscript for Sunburn. 2 days later, I get a call from him, and he goes, "John, so good to see you again. It's good you're writing." I said, "Great. What do you think of the book?" He goes, "It's really terrible." Really, that's what he said. He said, "You shouldn't do this. This is not very good. You don't want to hurt your reputation in the future by having this out." I said, "Geez, that's bad news." So the next day, I get another call, and it's from this woman who is literally crying. And she turns out to be Terry's wife, Pat, who I didn't know from Eve. But Terry had left Sunburn's manuscript on their bed table. She picked it up and read it and thought it was the most beautiful book she had ever read. She was crying at the end of it. She went, "This is just genius. I love this book." Well, I said, what should I do with it? That's what I was going to ask your husband about. What do you think I should do? And he said, and she said, well, I don't know anything about the publishing industry, but I do know that there are things called literary awards, and this should be in one of those as a, submission. And I'll do it for you. I said, thanks, great. Forgot about it, more or less. Got a daytime job to start paying the bills at Guitar Player magazine. I was their advertising director. So one day in May, I'm sitting at my desk doing advertising, fascinating stuff. I get a call from a woman who identifies herself from the San Francisco Foundation and telling me that my novel Sunburn had just won the Joseph Henry Jackson Award for Best Novel by a California author. I'm sitting there going, you gotta be kidding me. In fact, I was so emphatic about it kidding me, I hung up on her. I thought it was my sister Kathy making a joke. She calls me back 2 minutes later. She goes, did we just get cut off? I said, this isn't funny, Kathy. This is just not funny. She goes, I'm not Kathy. I'm with the so blah, blah, blah. Anyway. So now you're thinking we're moving quickly through my career. Put on the brakes. Put on the brakes. Because while that book was being shopped around, I was trying to write another book. And also I figured, well, if I've got this Sunburn with an award behind it, clearly I'm going to get published right away. So I sent it out, try to get an agent, try to do what everybody's doing nowadays, which is get an agent, get a publishing deal. 4 years went by, during which time I wrote 2 or 3 other novels and submitted Sunburn to everybody in America. So 4 years later, my brother is at a UC Berkeley basketball game, and he runs into a woman named Margie Close, who was a girlfriend of mine in high school. So she said, what's John up to? Mike says, well, he thinks he's a stupid author right now because he did this, we won this prize. There was nothing but, eloquence here. So my brother says, so Margie says, well, I'd love to read this book of his, So I sent it to her. She's the mother of 3 in LA. She has nothing to do with publishing. She's a stay-at-home mom. She reads the book. She loves it. She looks up publishers in the LA phone book. There's one publisher. It's Pinnacle Books. It's a paperback house. She walks down with her children in like the stroller, gives it to the secretary at the front desk. The next day they call her up and they say they want to buy it. Meanwhile, here I am back in San Francisco working as a secretary at the Bank of America building, 2 novels in my drawers that aren't getting published. And Sunburn finally, after 4 years, comes out with a kind of a semi-pornographic cover and really not a very good marketing job, but it was my first published book.
Out of curiosity, what were the names of those other 2 unpublished novels that you wrote back then during that waiting game?
Here's one of them. This is not a joke. This is a 426-page manuscript that I am retyping to try to resell it after 45 years. And you will love this, Jake, because it's all about the music business. It's about the 60s in the Haight-Ashbury. It's called liner notes, something that you and I know, but I wouldn't say 10% of the kids nowadays would even know what a liner note is.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's one of the books. And another one I wrote called, what do they call it? I've changed so many titles, I get confused about all this. But anyway, I gave it some name and it had to do with a guy named Dismas Hardy who ran a coffee shop in San Francisco. Another manuscript that big. Meanwhile, I'm still working at the phone company or at the Bank of America. I decided to go down to Los Angeles and try to make it down there. I get a daytime job with the Guardians of the Jewish Homes for the Aging in Los Angeles. I become their associate director. I love my story because it's so linear. Anyway, I'm still trying to sell these damn 2 manuscripts that are in my drawer. And in the meanwhile, since I had nothing else to do, I decided to write another book. And this time I was really serious about how I was going to do it and was going to actually write a full-length novel. And I started that, got most of the way through it, did the same kind of thing, started sending it out, realized it wasn't happening. It wasn't very good. I gave up. I said, I want to be around the business. I want to be around books because I love books. So what I did is I decided to apply to graduate school and get an MFA in writing. If nothing else, I'll be around kids who want to read. It's just nice. It's a good life. And I got accepted by University of Massachusetts at Amherst. So another year went by during which I worked at the Guardians. And then I was ready to go back east. I met a woman who became my wife and still is my wife of many, many years. And we're still greatly in love. And she was very supportive right from the beginning. She said, "You're good. You're a good writer. You should be writing, not just going to school to write." So you'll love this part of the story. I went back east to be with her while we got through the summer before I went up to UMass at Amherst. So I got a job singing in pubs all around. This first time I was back with my guitar, but I was singing in pubs all around as a solo guy. And I did that for the summer. I had a lot of good gigs. I mean, I worked a lot in Old Town Alexandria. It was nice. But I figured, oh, well, I'm going up to graduate school in a month, so it's all neither here nor hit nor miss. So I said, all right, I'm going to go to my day job, which I'm a great typist. I mean, if you think I'm a good guitar player, I'm not, but I am one of the world's best typists. Here, I'll give you a little tip here. Well, you can't see it. Well, never mind. I have a specialized typewriter here because it's got to keep your knuckles and your everything going because it doesn't work otherwise. Anyway, I had a good daytime job. I was getting paid $17 an hour, which back then in 1982 was a fortune to type. So believe it or not, the guy who hired me comes in and I'm, typing up all kinds of legal documents and stuff. And he tells me, "Hey, you published a book, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I did. He says, "So you can write. You're just not a typist." I said, "Well, yeah, I guess I can write." The guy goes, "Well, listen, we got a filing in front of the Interstate Commerce Commission in the next month, and we got no narrative for our data. And I wonder if you'd think about writing up our data with a narrative." And I said, "What's it about?" And he goes, "Well, it's about the revenue adequacy of the Burlington Northern Railroad." And I went, "Oh, sure it is. I'm really cool with that." But in fact, that's what it was. I sat down, I wrote a 400-page manuscript, and we won the case, $42 million. If you think $17 an hour is a lot of money in 1982, $42 million was Fort Knox. So anyway, the guy says to me, John Anderson, nice guy, he said, "This is just unbelievable. We can't let you out of here and send you to Massachusetts. We need you to write up all of our data and get our stuff in order." So I took the filthy lucre and I didn't go to UMass. I went back to work, this time at least not as a typist, but as a writer. I was writing technical stuff for the Interstate Commerce Commission. Wow. Is this all real?
It's
Am I
crazy.
making this stuff up?
It could be in a book.
It's too wild to me to think when I go back to, realize that I was doing all this stuff. It doesn't seem very real to me in some ways. There were just so many changes of, scene. So of course, my wife and I did the next really brilliant thing. I worked for 2 years. I came home one day and I said, I'm just suicidal here. I just don't want to do what I'm doing. She says, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to be a writer." She goes, "Well, why don't you be a writer?" I said, "Well, the big problem is I don't have a manuscript." Hello. She goes, I said, "My 2 manuscripts that I've tried to sell 1 million times, I'm not going to go through that again." She says to me, "What about that Son of Holmes book?" Now remember, I'm now 39 years old. I wrote the book when I was 24 years old and had never shown it to anybody except Lisa. Lisa goes, "I really love that book. Why don't you send it out?" I said, "I don't even know who to send it to." Well, Lisa says, My boss is an architect. Her husband is a lawyer. Her husband's associate is a literary agent. So I give the book, Son of Holmes, to this literary agent. And what I do, because I'm really a little bit crazy, my wife and I decided we're going to go and explore Europe. So I gave this manuscript to this agent in Washington, D.C. Lisa and I went over, we toured Europe, we lived in Greece for several months. We had a great, great time. Then because of international problems with Ronald Reagan and things like that, he told everybody to leave Greece. So we thought that'd be smart. Flew home. First thing that happened, my sister-in-law, when I walk off the plane, says, "You just got a letter buying your book, Son of Holmes." So, of course, what I did, what anybody would do, was I flew or drove to Los Angeles to try to make it as a novelist in LA because I had a book.
Going back in time for fans to your early 20s when you were first writing it, what was the original muse for The Son of Holmes?
I loved Nero Wolfe and I loved Sherlock Holmes. I mean, loved him. I was fanatical about him when I was back in college because I was an English major, of course, and I was reading all this Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and, the modern novel in translation and all this heavy, heavy stuff. And yet to chill out about it, I took off on Sherlock Holmes, Nero Wolfe, and it became very obvious to me that Sherlock Holmes and Irene Adler during the lost years had an affair which resulted in a child. And the child they named Auguste Lupa. Now, Auguste Lupa is interesting if you happen to know your Latin well enough. Auguste is a Caesar, the way Nero is a Caesar, and Wolfe, of course, is Lupa is Latin for wolf. So that's where he began. And I just saw that as a very easy thing to do that I wrote kind of as an exercise for myself when I was in, just my senior year of college. So I guess you're right. I did write Son of Holmes in college. I just didn't think about it as a book.
Rasputins Revenge came right on the heels of the success of Son of Holmes. How much fun was it to write a sequel to a book you'd actually started 2 decades earlier?
14 years before, I think I finally learned how to write somehow, doing this stuff for the consulting firm I worked for in DC. I cared a lot about it and wanted to get it right. Started reading different authors like Elmore Leonard, people who were, our guys. And so then I was in LA and when Son of Holmes came out, my publisher asked me if I could deliver a sequel. And I went, well, no, I can't because this is not really a thing. And he goes, yes, it is. It's really good. Why don't you try to come up with something? So I'm sitting at my typing thing at a law firm in LA. And all of a sudden I get this idea, Rasputins Revenge. I mean, it came to me like now. And that's the only book that's ever happened to. It was completely formed in my brain. I had the whole narrative sound. I wanted the voice to be a certain way. I wanted it to sound like a Victorian novel, and it did. It was very well received. And the next thing that happened is I'm thinking this is going to work. Except, darn, what happened was my publisher didn't pay the $50 filing fee to use Sherlock Holmes as a character. So the Holmes estate sued me. And I'm sitting there going, what did I do? They just said, we want you to cease and desist. No more books of this type. Forget it. You don't have the rights. Well, now everybody and their brother's got a Sherlock Holmes book in their pocket, right? But anyway, this was before that particular wave came rushing over. So anyway, here I am now typing full time. I'm married. I have 2 children. I decide I'm going to write a different kind of book because I can't write a Holmes book. So I sat down and I started my Dismas Hardy books. And first I sat down and there I was in my bedroom. When I got up in the morning, I'd write from 6 to 8 and then write again when I got home from my full-time day job. And within about, guess what, 4 or 5 months, I had Dead Irish. I sent it off to my publisher. He loved it. Said, write a sequel.
We'd get hate mail if I didn't ask about the original origin story for your most beloved character, Dismas Hardy. Also, where did that great name first come to you?
The first thing you have to know is you can't say that Hardy was a soldier. He was a Marine. And if you want to talk about getting a lot of emails, make that mistake sometime. Anyway, what happened with Hardy? This is all true. All of this is not fiction. Hardy, the name Dismas, because as I said, I was a good Catholic. It was a good idea, I thought, a great name to have him be Dismas, because that name resonates deeply for a certain type of person. And Dismas is also the patron saint of thieves and murderers. You know, he's the good thief on the cross next to Jesus. And it's a very powerful image just by itself. Then we also have Hardy, clearly come from the Hardy Boys. And even overtly in, I think, The Mercy Rule, one of my books, I say that Hardy's Dismas's parents, Tom and whoever the other Hardy boy was, Frank, anyway, and their girlfriend were actually married and had Dismas Hardy. So, I mean, he is in the pack of the, exactly, in fact, in the pack of what this guy should have been all along, you know. And of course, he was a Marine, he was an attorney, he was everything you can think of. Does this sound like anybody you know? You know, this is kind of what I went through. I changed so many jobs and everything else. But when we meet Hardy, he's already had a lot of interesting, not so good things happen to him. And I think one of the things that I drew upon is, you know, a lot of interesting things that happened to me as well. And I said, you know, you might as well tap that and make things a little heavier, a little more serious, and leaven it by being funny.
The dialogue from book one between Dismas and his cohorts has just always been so entertaining. How do you first hear that in your head when the conversations are happening as it's going down on paper?
I am super blessed with a couple of friends who I've mentioned already in this thing. But one of the things that really carries through in all of my friendships is I tend to be a little bit of a wise guy. And my friends are the ones who get it and are back at me as a bit of a wise guy. And they're pretty smart people and they're pretty fun to be around. And I knew that if I was going to try to write Hardy and have him have a friend or a wife or anybody else, you got to have somebody who's, you know, real and funny and super sarcastic. You know, my friend Al Giannini says, dry, snide, and snotty. You know, if that's not it, you're doing something wrong. So it wasn't like an editor told me this. I mean, the thing that felt real to me was the dialogue that started coming out with this voice of me being a bit more of a wise guy than I am in real life, which I don't know if this will come through in my interview here, but I'm a little bit of a, non-conforming perhaps type.
Turning to those cohorts like Abe Glitsky and David Freeman, how much fun do you have populating the pages with all these great supporting cast characters?
Well, I knew that Hardy couldn't be alone. You know, it's tough to write good dialogue if there's only one person talking. And so right from the very first, I had no idea what was going to happen, but I was in Dead Irish. And I go to Candlestick Park in those days to see the Giants playing. And there is Abe Glitsky fully formed. He's got the name Abe Glitsky. He's half black and half Jewish. He's got scars through his lips. He's got Abe Glitsky. And he just literally walked out to, this was kind of like the Rasputins Revenge moment, but it wasn't as all encompassing. But all of a sudden, here's Glitsky. And boom, he was Hardy's buddy when they were both cops. And boom, they, you know, and he just came alive. There's no other way to look at it. I mean, he just came alive to me. And he stayed, and he's still alive, thank God.
Yeah.
But, you know, David Freeman is very similar. Hardy was in this is a couple of books along, but Hardy was in the jail interviewing his client, you know, and all of a sudden, this guy is a defense attorney, just a freewheeling crazy man, you know, comes in and just like reads him the riot act and, you know, says you're going to turn over the conviction and turn over the appeal and everything is going to go to hell. You can't talk to my client without my permission, blah, blah, blah. I'm going, who the hell is this guy? He just took over, you know, and Hardy walks out rather chagrined and kind of feeling beaten down. And never did it occur to me that Freeman would become Freeman. At the point, he was just a guy in this scene who was kind of the way he was. And this is what I find fascinating about all of these books. These characters tend to be alive, and they tell you, you're not cutting me out of this book. You're not letting me not have a place. I need to be in this book because X, Y, Z.
Fascinating.
Sure enough, that's what happens. And you asked a question earlier about naming things and names of characters. The names of characters, they just walk up to me and say, hi. Hi, I'm Abe Blitzky. Hi, I'm David Freeman. I mean, I don't know. I know guys look in the phone book. I'm tempted to. If I have, like a Filipino name, I might decide I'm going to find a better name than the one I'm thinking of in my brain. Or other, ethnicities or things like that. I try to make sure that I've got the right name for the right person. But most of the time, by far the majority of the time, it's just the guy walks up or the woman walks up and says, hi, here I am.
What a wonderful gift. It's something you've entertained us with really from Dead Irish and The Vig on through the whole series. Does plot come to you early on in the writing of one of these books?
Again, this was something I knew when I finished Dead Irish that I had an idea that might actually do some good. So I started writing The Vig, and my idea was, my friend Al had this, we used to have these discussions about, aren't you afraid about being a prosecutor? Aren't you afraid that somebody's going to get out of jail after their term and come and kill you? And he goes, no, I don't think they're going to want to kill me. They're going to want to kill the defense attorney who didn't get them off. And I found that to be true over the course of research on 30 books now, whatever it is. So anyway, and Al was the guy, by the way, who I went to Africa to visit, who kind of nursed me through my malaria and my E. coli and my pneumonia and my 45-pound weight loss. So he's my bud. I mean, he is like my brother. And we're still very close because he's a real attorney. And he's a homicide attorney in San Francisco. Hello. It's like the perfect guy. And he's been my best friend since I was 14. So he is my main editor. I turn to him at the beginning of books often and go, what are the concepts or ideas we're going to be talking about? Because I write from themes. I don't write from plot ideas. Most of the time it's a theme. And this was the thematic idea of, your past guy that you put in jail coming back to haunt you. And that's what starts the Vig going. And, it just kept going.
As the series got more and more popular with sequels like Hard Evidence, what were some of the behind-the-scenes pressures that go on for a new author when you're going through that?
So after the Vig was written, by that time I was working now 3 jobs. I was getting up in the morning at about 5:30. I write from 6 to 8 in my garage. Then from 9 to 5, I worked as a typist at a law firm downtown LA, Pettit and Martin, which coincidentally is the law firm that had the big shooting, 20 years ago. So it was a real heavy place to work. And then at night, I would finish up my regular day job typing, and I would go around the high office buildings in LA, seeing if they had more typing that I could do, because it was all about making a living and I wasn't doing it. Even though I was getting paid, my publisher at the time, Donald I. Fine, was not very good at paying on time and not very good at paying all the amount he owed you.
Yeah.
Everybody knows it. It's not pretty. But anyway, I was working full time, 3 jobs. So one Sunday after I'd finished the Vig and I was trying to think of what was going to come next, I went body surfing in Seal Beach in LA. And I got an earache when I came out. I'd wiped out a few times. Next day I woke up, I had a fever of 104. I decided to stay in bed all day, didn't even go to a ball game that I had tickets for. My wife comes home from the ball game with our two children with her, a 9-month-old and a 19-month-old, something ridiculous. But I'm kind of delirious. It's now 1:00 in the morning. I'm completely insane. I'm sitting on the floor, I'm throwing up, things are not good. So Lisa takes me to the hospital with the 2 kids. And the doctor tells her to get a babysitter for the kids because I'm going to die in 2 hours. True story.
What did you have?
I had spinal meningitis.
Whoa.
And I was well advanced. They had to give me 2 injections in my back to figure out how bad it was. And they decided it was bad. So I went into a coma for 11 days. 11 days. And that was hard on Lisa, not so hard on me because I wasn't around. But it was pretty bad. And at the end of that time, I decided, you know what, we got to stop doing this writing part-time and working 3 jobs. And I decided, let's move up to Northern California. So we did, we moved up to Northern California. And I decided to take a look at the legal thriller idea because I wasn't getting offered enough money to live on. And I thought if I wrote a bigger book, which the legal thrillers tend to be, I could ask for more money. So that was what I did. I was motivated by the spinal meningitis to move and change things again. I was now 42 years old, and I decided to write Hard Evidence, which is the first of the legal thrillers. That book did very well internationally. Suddenly I had a contract for 6 figures. And I went, 6 figures? I was only making like $35,000 a year as a typist. And all of a sudden, Dell Books offered me $300,000 for Hard Evidence. And also in Europe and in Japan, they both put up big sums of money. So now I'm going, okay, what next? I got to write this damn next book and I don't have an idea. So I went to Al again, and he and Lisa and I went to a steakhouse, and they just pounded me on the idea that I had to write a book about spousal abuse and about the battered women syndrome. And I sat down and I said, okay, tell me everything I need to know. And Al and I walked through bunches of characters and bunches of things that could happen. And all of a sudden I had the basis for a big book. So I wrote The 13th Juror. It took me, 7-8 months.
Wow, this is such an amazing look at how the behind the scenes of the book business works for a writer on the rise. Were you surprised when The 13th Juror then went on to be such a big hit?
Well, it was a tremendous commercial success. I mean, it blew my mind. I mean, honestly, because I'd never had any. And now by this time I was 44 years old. And I went, how does this even work? That I'm actually being paid to write. And the real answer was I had to change agents. I had to say, I've got this one kind of big deal, but that's not going to be enough because number one, I'm not going to get paid that money, at least in any kind of timely fashion. And that's true. That's what happened. Donald Fine held on to that money for maybe 3 years. And I'm sitting there going, Don, I got, I need some money to live. I hate to use the word money all the time, but, I think I got an advance of $300,000 from my paperback house, didn't I? So, he'd send me 10,000 here, 5,000 there every few months. So anyway, it was a challenging time to say the least, but it gave me motivation to get somebody to change things. So I sent out copies of 13th Juror. He made an offer less than I made for Hard Evidence. I think the offer was $20,000. And I said, that doesn't sound like what I'm at. I think now with 5 books published and this big European deal and this big paperback deal, I think I need more than $20,000. And he said, well, sue me. So I said, okay. And I had a contract with him. I didn't sue him, but I just started sending out the manuscript through my agent, wonderful man named Mike Hamelberg. But I sent it out to 22, I think, publishers. All of them passed on the book. I didn't know they were going to pass. I showed up on the morning of what was going to be an auction, and we were going to put down 100,000 as our bidding point. Nobody showed up. Nobody showed up. Everybody had said they were going to show up and bid. Turned out Donald Fine had called every one of them and threatened them with legal action if they published one of my books. So here I am screwed. I don't know what to do. I said, okay, well, nobody can have it then. I'm not giving it to you. So 6 months later, while I'm writing another book to kind of keep things moving. 6 months later, I get a call from William Morrow, who's offering me $60,000 for the book, for 13th Juror. I got turned down by everybody. And then 6 months later, Morrow makes an offer. And then even worse than that, Donald Fine has the option to beat that offer by 10%. And he did. He offers 10%. I said, you still can't have it. Actually, I probably said, you still can't have it, you son of a bitch, because I was pretty angry at this time.
I bet.
But I didn't have any other options. I said, I got to go to him. Meanwhile, I got to get out of this. So my agent at the time, Mike Hamelberg, and I decided we were going to part ways because he didn't want to get in a fight with Don Fine because Don was a bully. So I said, well, listen, then I'm going to go talk to a couple of other agents. And I had written 2 books before to a guy named Barney Karpfinger, who was recommended by John Kellerman. So I flew back east, told him the situation, and said, what am I going to do? I mean, I think I got a real product here. And he said, what do you got next on the thing? And I said, well, I'm done with Dismas Hardy, but I'm writing another book with one of his sidekicks, Abe Glitsky, and I need to get 10 times what I made on my last book. And Barney looks at me and he goes, 10 times what you made on Hard Evidence? I said, yeah, 10 times. And he said, okay. Took him 4 days. 13th Juror came out. All of a sudden, the O.J. Simpson trial started. Guess what it was about? The battered women syndrome. Okay? The next 6 months, I was on the radio maybe 140 times. 13th Juror became a monster big hit. Stayed on the Times list for, I think, 7 weeks. Stayed on the European time lists for longer than that. Anyway, all of a sudden, I had a lot of power and a lot of money. And I had already started writing Guilt, which had nothing to do with Dismas Hardy. So I said, okay, well, I'll write another book. It doesn't have to be Dismas Hardy, because at the time I sold that, I didn't know Hardy was going to be the golden goose. So that's why if you ask, when did Guilt show up and why does it seem to be out of order? It all of a sudden becomes Abe Glitsky's, book. And why is A Certain Justice Abe Glitsky's book? Well, because there's nothing I could have done about it. I didn't want to write Dismas Hardy. He had already failed me.
What kind of advice would you give to an aspiring author, say that's got 2 or 3 books out, that finds himself in the same position?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is this is hard to do, but you have to get an agent who knows the business and who knows what he's doing. Because publishers basically are paying you for advance work that isn't done yet. So you've got to have an agent who can stand up for the idea that you're going to deliver brilliant stuff over and over and over again, and then leverage that. You say, no, I want a 3-book deal. I want a 3-book deal, 7 figures per deal. Don't mess around with me. And you find out pretty soon where you land on the roller coaster ride of life. I mean, it's challenging, I have to say.
How liberating was it to essentially be able to retire Dismas Hardy with Abe Glitsky's spin-offs, Certain Justice and Guilt?
It was great because, especially with A Certain Justice, I knew I was dealing with an incredibly powerful topic, again, thematic. And I was writing about race riots in America, in San Francisco. I mean, you could read that book today and you'd go, oh my God, this is like directly out of John's book, what's going on in our country today. And so I just decided I'm going to just write the best book I can write without Dismas Hardy in it. And I said, it's kind of liberating because I feel like if Al died, I wouldn't have had a career, because he was, for Hard Evidence and 13th Juror, he had given me a ton of thematic ideas and stuff about the internal workings of the Hall of Justice and the courts divisions and everything. So he was kind of my main man. And I said, it'll be nice to do a whole book without him. Not that I didn't, love him. And he's gone on to be my consultant for most of the books ever since. But to have him not be part of that book was very freeing, very liberating.
With new bestsellers like The Mercy Rule, The Motive, Nothing But the Truth, and A Plague of Secrets, then was it fun to bring Dismas back to life on the page?
Those first 3, I think, are really, really, if you're going to like those books, you're going to like me. You write these things and you feel like, you're in a vacuum. And you reach people, and you know you do because you get emails and nice stuff like that. But to hear it from you, thank you very much. It really is nice. So my favorite books, I think, one of my favorites, believe it or not, is A Certain Justice, just because it's got such a heavy theme and it's such a, I think, well-plotted book. The next one I really love is The Hearing, because The Hearing, Abe Blitzky falls in love with Tria after he's been widowed. And there's a great, I think, fabulous love story in the middle of that whole book. And then I have, later on in the series, I have the book The Fall, where Rebecca, Hardy's daughter, shows up. And she shows up as a grown-up who's gone to law school and now is going to be a lawyer, which has happened to me with my daughter, by the way. She is a lawyer now, and so is my son. And go figure, if you look back on what we've all talked about, there's no lawyer in my background. There's no law in my background. I never went to law school. Who knew? I don't know. So at the end of every one, you have to make sure that you make it a point to get your details correct. And for that, I finish my books and I hand them to Al, and he says, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong." And then I fix them.
What's different for you about writing a female protagonist, say Gina Roque in The Suspect?
Gina is one of those people who showed up. If you go through all my books, I think she's in every book. And especially on the early books, it's like, who is this girl? Where is she coming from? Why is she even in the book? But she seemed to own every scene that she appeared in. And so after maybe, 12 or 13 books, she finally just said, "Look, John, I need to be the boss of this book. Let me have it." And so I had a really good theme going. It was really fun in terms of like the venality of politicians. I know that's hard to imagine. But anyway, we got a couple of bad people here, and Gina is stuck in the middle of them. Also, she drinks the right kind of scotch, and everything about her just works. And so I decided she decided, I'm taking over this story, and she bushwhacked me, and Suspect became, I think, my second most popular book. So I'm glad she showed up. And I think she showed up one other time, but not in a case.
After keeping Dismas fans coming back for 18 New York Times bestsellers over 30 years, when new books like Poison and The Keeper, it must be fun to ask, what am I going to get him into this time?
There's nothing fun about publishing. There's nothing fun about it at all. You just sit there and you grind out the work and you hope somebody likes it at the other end. And, it can be a beautiful experience when it's working, but I wouldn't say it's number one fun. So
The Rule of Law and The Missing Piece, which marked the 18th and 19th books in the series, watched Dismas age in real time. When did you make that decision? Was that early on? And how has that worked for you throughout the series?
One of the things I did is I made him age in real time. This is the biggest problem I think that novelists have to make about their choice of what they're going to do. Because you really limit yourself. I mean, look at Sue Grafton. She died, but she went from A to Y, and she made the decision to have Kinsey Malone never get old. And, there's really a lot to be said for that. Although I made the decision, I wanted everything to be in real life terms. I really can't care about that stuff. And so to have Dismas and Abe and their wives and their children, everybody gets older. The thing that's good about it is it's familiar, it's easy to write, it's kind of fun to say that word. But the other problem is, once you've done it and you've got your guys who are 65 years old or whatever they may be, they may not be as sexy as they were when they were 32. And you want to have some interesting stuff going on in the books, not just overt sex. People have lives that are interesting and fun and can be related to by younger people. And one of the things I'm having issues with now, I've just handed in my latest book, by the way. And, that's book number 30. And Hardy's, he's just too old to be sexy anymore. So when I'm thinking about what I'm going to do after this, I'm going, maybe I'm going to let him go to pasture. I don't know. And this is not a joke. I mean, a lot of my readers are dying. I got 85-year-old readers, who've been reading me for 25 years, and they started at 60. When Hardy was a young stud, just hooking up with Franny and all that good stuff. And now they, next thing you hear, I sometimes hear from spouses saying, you made my husband's last days wonderful, thank you. It's sad to hear. I mean, it's good to hear for me a little, but it's sad to hear about the reality of characters growing in real time. So if I was going to start a series now, I don't think I would do that. This was a pretty political book. I mean, the rule of law, we're not particularly living under it right now. And it's a little bit of a challenge to find things and not become a political hack, which I don't want to do. I have strong political feelings, but I don't want to subject my readers to everything I think. So I make characters sometimes be really terrible people. And that's what I wanted to do in this book, The Rule of Law. And then I figured I literally took a sabbatical of a year. So the book I just handed in April of this year. So, and it's a Dismas Hardy book. It's called Jigsaw. And it's very much, it wraps up a lot of things that, may or may not show up again. You'll just have to see.
With the Hunt Club, Treasure Hunt and the Hunter, we meet another of your really popular characters, Wyatt Hunt. Where did you want to take him differently on the page as a protagonist than past ones?
I love Wyatt Hunt. That's one of the things I did to counteract the whole Dismas and Abe getting old thing. I mean, this guy's a total stud. He's great. He works out every day. He plays guitar. He body surfs. He windsurfs. He does it all. And he's funny and he's smart and he's totally different than Hardy because he doesn't have to play by the rules. So anyway, I love him as a character. Plus, so much that I explored with the Hunter, because Hunt was not a divorced. He was an orphan, and his challenge in his life is kind of dealing with who his parents were, what kind of guy his dad was, his mom was. Anyway, I recommend The Hunter. It's my favorite of all the books.
Wow.
I mean, I just love it because of all the human stuff in it. And I emulated it so much when I was writing it that I had literally the beginning of migraine headaches to kind of feel the way Wyatt was feeling. I didn't want to. I mean, it's the last thing you want to do is get a migraine that's going to last you while you write the book. Hi, this is fun. But I did. I mean, I wrote it up and it turned out, I think, pretty good.
With Fatal, which is another really popular standalone in your catalog, how much do you enjoy doing a single novel versus one that has to be linked to a broader series?
Again, everything seems to run around in little circles in my brain, but what I was trying to do with Fatal was once again deal with the aging issue with Dismas and Abe. Because I wanted to have a woman who was younger, who was not, 1 foot in the grave, who was sexy, who had a lot of good stuff going for her. Plus, I just wanted a different crew out there on the page. There are a lot of people who are interesting in the world, and if you capture parts of them, then you got a good thing going. And I think what happened with Beth Tully is she was just a great character, and I knew that she was going to be able to withstand the book.
You won the prestigious American Author Medal among many other accolades. Where do they rank for you in terms of importance?
Ironically, one of my favorite awards, if not my favorite award, is the Strand magazine has a coffee mug. I don't know if you know it, but it says greatest mystery writers of all time. And it's got Arthur Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie, Elmore Leonard, and John Lescroart. And I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. So in terms of like blowing my mind and going, how cool is this? That's probably the one I feel, because it's my confreres. It's Andrew Gooley, who's a great guy who runs Strand magazine. I mean, if you're accoladed by those guys, you feel like you're legitimate.
With your multiple generations of fans, what do you most enjoy about interacting back and forth, be it on email or say post-COVID out on the road again on book tour?
It's just such a great bunch of colleagues, actually, all the people who are working with me with the International Thriller Writers. And I just got finished my term as the president of that for the last 4 years. And I'll tell you, between Heather Graham and Lee Child, Steve Berry, to have Bob Stein, to have these people be your friends, it's just like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. I'm so lucky. And that's the way I feel. I feel blessed to be part of this, community.
What are you busy in the lab conjuring up that fans can expect to get their hands on next?
Well, right now I'm writing a recipe book for my grandchildren. I can't promise what's going to come next because I'm just not sure. I'm still taking not a sabbatical, but I'm taking time off and deciding what to do about this Dismas Hardy getting old Abe Glitsky getting old kind of a thing. I got to figure out how they're going to be relevant. And it's a little hard to figure out what relevance is in these pandemic days.
Do you ever reflect back with characters like Dismas and Abe on the actual lives that they've led through these books in terms of plotting the future ones?
Yeah, well, I mean, you go back and you look at what he's done, what both of these guys have done, and you realize they basically tackled every important sociological theme in America right now. And to think, I look at my bookshelf, I got a bookshelf here in the office, and the whole wall is my books. And I'm just going, how did this happen? How did I even make any money doing this? Much less have a career. And it's just been fantastic. So
before we close, it's a dreaded advice question. Seriously though, what do you tell authors when they ask how... Before we go, it's the dreaded advice question. But seriously, what do you tell aspiring authors when they ask you, how do I build as prolific and time-tested a catalog as you have around the world?
Persevere and learn your craft. Learn, hate to say this, grammar. Grammar is a big deal, and you have to be able to write effectively. You have to know your grammar. So I would say, if you're having problems and you feel like you need an editor, go by your Strunk and White elements of style, memorize it, and try to, incorporate that into your work. It's really all about the craft. Listen to it very carefully and reread it, because everybody reads a snatch of dialogue and they go, boy, this guy's so good, he just, did it. Well, that's probably 10 drafts. They read this little nothing of dialogue and people go, God, look, this is so great, because, there's a payoff at the end of the notes. You let it go and you hit it. And if it doesn't have that, rewrite it until it does. You got to make your work sing. And if it doesn't sing, you got to become a plumber. You got to work this stuff. It's a job, but it's a wonderful job. But what you have to do is you have to fill up pages every day. And the only way you fill up pages is you bold and you're not afraid to take chances. So that's what I found I had to do. I had 3 book deals coming down the road from Delacorte and then again from Dutton. And, if you have that kind of pressure, then nobody's going to feel sorry for you if you don't deliver. So you just sit down and override all of your doubts and just go, I don't have any doubts. I'm a genius. I'm going to write this book.
What?
I don't really think I'm a genius, but you do a little sales pitch on yourself. I call it genius mode. And right after genius mode, I have what I call idiot mode, which is you read it again and you go, who's the idiot who wrote this book? And you hope it's not me, but it sometimes is. So you fix it. I don't know if there's a trick to it. I think really the idea is don't let yourself get psyched out by expectations. Make sure you'll just sit down and put down your 4 to 10 pages a day. And when you do that, pretty soon you got a book that's starting to write itself. Once you get halfway through, you kind of see where things are starting to go. Now, this is not to say that you don't get surprised by your characters. And that's when it's really a blast. When things are happening and you just go, oh my God, I'm going to kill this guy. Look at this. And he's my guy. He's my franchise guy. Not saying anything that I'm going to give it away to your viewers here, but I have to say, you do have to once in a while pull a trigger and kill your characters, and it breaks your heart.
Mr. Lescroart, it's been a great honor. Thank you so much for taking out the time to be on About the Authors TV.
There it is, my book wall. Those are all my books and all my editions. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.